I think the biggest thing that I would want to impart, this, call it wisdom, call it, closing thoughts, is that we are all moved by different things in this world. Okay. Whether it's, whatever that advocacy looks like. It's everything from making sure that healthy meals are being provided into your community, foster kids, or, taking care of animals, whatever you're moved by that really stirs your soul. That is your calling. And I just encourage people to grab a hold of that with two hands and don't let go, and to fight for what you believe is right. For me, that's justice for Melissa Witt. Does that answer some other unsolved trauma in my life? Maybe it does. One of the things that we didn't discuss, and I'll just briefly talk about, is that as a child, someone tried to abduct me from a bowling alley, and that abduction was thwarted. And is there something psychological there for me because Melissa went missing from a bowling alley? Probably. There probably is, because my story ended so differently.
That's LaDonna Humphrey, a writer, documentarian, and advocate for victims of crime. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. LaDonna Humphrey is an award-winning writer, documentarian, journalist, and advocate for crime victims. LaDonna is also the co-founder of the nonprofit All the Lost Girls, a group focused on finding justice for victims in certain kinds of crime cases. The foundation focuses on funding forensic efforts like DNA testing, genetic genealogy, and other efforts to build awareness through things like billboards and other critical resources needed to close cases. LaDonna is also the founder of the True Crime Northwest Arkansas event, a true crime event hosted by All the Lost Girls that brings together investigators, true crime fans, experts, and others to, among other things, shed a steady light on cold cases, including those of the missing and unidentified. LaDonna is the author of 2 books about the 1994 murder of Melissa Witt, a 19-year-old student who is believed to have been abducted close to her home in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and whose body was found in a remote stretch of woodland about 50 miles away in the Ozark National Forest, a forest that encompasses more than 1.2 million acres, mostly in the Ozark Mountains. Her first book, The Girl I Never Knew, focuses on LaDonna's life story and the hunt for Melissa's killer. Her second book, Strangled, goes beyond Melissa's case and explores the dark web and sex trafficking. Her third book, Connected by Fate, is scheduled to be published on April 20 of this year, which would have been Melissa's birthday. LaDonna has received a number of awards for her 2023 documentary, Uneven Ground, which focuses on Melissa's story. Melissa's case remains unsolved. LaDonna is also the co-host of 2 podcasts, Extinguished, a long-form podcast about the murdered and missing, and Dark Secrets, which explores the death fetish and pornography industries. LaDonna is also the mother of 7, including 5 with special needs. She imagined a life as a single woman, being a reporter who would never have children, and that all changed. LaDonna studied journalism as an undergraduate at the University of Arkansas and saw herself working for a large newspaper or magazine, but she once told the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, "God took me in a different direction." LaDonna finished college while raising the first of her 2 children, went into a career in communications and marketing, got married and divorced before becoming a foster parent, and volunteered to help churches find placements for foster children. In addition to her writing and her work right now, LaDonna also works as the director of a sober living treatment facility in Arkansas. Today, we're going to discuss LaDonna's journey, how her life transformed from what she initially thought it would be into one that it has become, how she was taken by the case of Melissa and by foster children, and how both and her own story are inextricably linked. And the work she's done to bring peace and closure to so many others, despite Melissa's case still remaining unsolved. Hey, LaDonna, I just wanted to thank you for coming on. I remember being introduced to you at CrimeCon. It was very interesting. So I was exhausted, right? And I was sitting with a bunch of people in the corner, and our mutual friend, Robert Palmer, came up and said, the one person you need to meet at CrimeCon is LaDonna. And I'm like, okay. And he comes back to me and he's like, the one person you really need to come on. You need to meet LaDonna.
No pressure, right? No
Right,
pressure
yeah.
for me, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, afterwards, I'm like, who's LaDonna? So
Well,
after that, that's the trick secret of being at CrimeCon for me, since I'm not like, I am a true crime fan, but I'm not like a true crime fan. So I found out about all of your work afterwards, and I was just really impressed at the breadth of the sort of like the advocacy, the writing, even you as a mom impressed me.
aw.
So I'm really thrilled to have you on to talk.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I was really thrilled to get to meet you at CrimeCon. And like you said, you mentioned our mutual friend, Robert, and he's a great guy. Any friend of his is a friend of mine. And yeah, I've been looking forward to this interview all day. So I'm excited to get to chat with you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I wanted to just sort of start off, in sort of preparing for that interview, and certainly, paying attention to you over time. There's so many different things, the books you've written, the cases that you've pursued, and the advocacy you've done. But, one of the things that I read this article in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and it was dealing with sort of like you as a mom and a foster mom. But within that article, it talks about how you imagined yourself being single, not being a mom, being a journalist working for a big news organization. And I was just curious, like, what sort of like got you to the point where you were sort of thinking about those things, and what growing up was like for you, and where and how did you get to that point?
Oh, well, let's buckle up because have I got a story for you? um, Well, I grew up in Southwest Oklahoma, really small farming community, and I was actually born into a sect. So, I don't use the word cult, but I do use the word sect because I do
Mm.
believe that there was a lot of indoctrination there, and was really just unhappy growing up in this small town. Not anything to do there, as you can imagine, and when we had the opportunity as a family to move, we moved to Arkansas. I believe it was my 7th grade year. So that was 85, 86 ish, if I recall. I'm so old, that gives away my age. Um, but I went, from living in this small town, going to school with the same 11 people, 12 people in my class, to going to a huge school where I had hundreds of people in my class.
That
And
must have been so weird. How old were you?
it, it was weird. It was 7th grade.
Okay, wow.
I turned, I believe, 13, when we actually then ended up moving to Northwest Arkansas. But I moved to Greenwood, Arkansas that first year out of Oklahoma. And it was just like culture shock for me. Everything was different. And really, it was that time of my life that I really found that I loved to write, because I was writing letters to all of my friends back home religiously. Because when you get to know me, I don't do anything halfway. It is full speed all the way or not at all.
Well,
And
that's so interesting. I never even thought of that because I moved a lot as a kid. But and became a writer. But one of the things I did when I moved from in middle school from Georgia to Virginia was just constantly build pen pals, not just with the people who I was friends with in Georgia, but when anyone would leave Virginia where I had moved, like one of the kids in our neighborhood, I would then start pen paling with them. And I never even really thought like keeping those connections. And then another thing that you said about like transitioning, you said everything was different. I wonder whether like, it's very similar to sort of like journalism, right? But someone once described to me, one of my friends, he's like, I'm so jealous of you being a journalist because you get to be a connoisseur of life. Like if you see a Christmas tree on top of a building, you get to go figure it out. But I wonder whether our moving like opened us up to sort of like seeing different things and learning about them and thinking about them. I know I totally sidetracked you there, but
No, no, I think that's an interesting point because I really do think that moving, like in the way you've described it to what you said, just like almost unlocked something in my brain that I didn't know existed before. And, I was exposed to new things, new people, new experiences, but I was still hanging on to that life that I had left behind through letters. And so I really was able to cultivate, my love for and the power of the written word. And that's when I really thought to myself, I like to write. I think that this is something I might be a little bit good at. And I excelled in that in school and at least the writing portion, like math and science, no way. But, and that's really just kind of what I got the taste for writing. And then as soon as I could in school, I joined the yearbook and newspaper committee. And once I caught that reporting bug, even for the school newspaper, as silly as that sounds, I was hooked.
oh, I completely get it. I'm like, my high school newspaper days were some of my best. You could do
Exactly.
anything you wanted.
And you're in high school, junior high and high school, and you are you become passionate about different things. And my personality really is what I said earlier is like it's all or nothing for me. And so there were issues that I was extremely passionate about. I was campaigning against nuclear arms back then. I mean, just silly stuff if I look back now, but I was passionate about it and I would write about it. And that really then spilled over into me wanting to pursue journalism
Hmm.
as a college student. And then I really honed my craft and really decided that for me, I wanted to get out there and tell the hard stories and uncover, you know, those things that other people didn't want to write about. And that was really what I thought I was going to do with my life, that I was never going to marry and that I was just going to be a reporter. I
Pursue this.
was,
You're like a 0 to 60, all or nothing, go big or go home.
that's right. Go big, go home. But that's not the way that life worked out. That's just not, you don't take account for falling in love and then starting a family and doing all those things that kind of sidetrack you from those things that you first fell in love with. And, that happened. I didn't end up becoming this hard nosed reporter. I ended up actually kind of being driven down a different path, so to speak, pulled down a different path. Different people see it differently. My faith, I speak openly about that. To me, it's, God put me on a different path. And so that's been nonprofit work for me. And then it was just in the last, you know, 8 years that I really kind of turned back towards those journalistic endeavors that my heart missed. That
It's kind of a blending of them, really, right now.
it is. It's because I have really two careers. Really, I have this true crime career, if you want to call it true crime. I mean, that seems a little cheesy, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a
You
weird
know,
world. It's a
it's
really
weird.
weird world. Word, yeah.
It's weird, and this advocacy to focus on the true crime genre, and then I am also an executive director for a sober living home, which I'm equally passionate about, and so it's an interesting mix. I
Yeah.
am. People think, "Wow, why do you do both? Why don't you just choose one?" And I say, "Why do I have to choose one? Why can't I do both?" That's always my answer. So
You sort of, yeah, you love them both, you pursue them both. It's kind of interesting. I'm curious thinking back to those moments where You said you sort of got dragged away. I wanted to ask you about like, was it like an obvious moment where you're like not going on this path, or was it just like slow baby steps at a time?
I think it was slow baby steps. I was young. I'd fallen in love with who turned out to be my first husband. I've been married twice. I'm married to my second husband, and fell in love. You're young, and we got married probably too young, and about 3 or 4 years into that marriage, we had not planned on having kids, but as the way it turned out, I ended up pregnant, and that really does change your world. And once that child was born, of course, I'm a fully dedicated mom and was in love again with this child. And then a couple of years later, I had another one, and so you just have these series of events that happen that I don't regret. Like that's an amazing part of my life. My kids are the best part of me. And it took me away from that initial goal. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It was different than what I had anticipated.
Yeah, you found your path. It's kind of interesting too because, I probably share similar qualities. Like I'm hard headed, I'm go big or go home. And, I sort of feel like the things that usually I get pulled off my path and onto the right path subtly, because if it were less subtle, I would resist it. So that's part of the reason why I was curious about that. But you had also mentioned that you had grown up in a sect, you said, that had some strange tendencies. And you mentioned your faith. What was your faith journey like when you were young, and then eventually in high school? Was there a sort of pulling away and pulling back, or how did that journey go?
For sure. I did grow up in the sect. It's called the Church of the Firstborn. I'm not sad to out them in any way whatsoever. And it was really one of those things that was forced upon you. It was extremely religious, extremely zealous. Example, people are expected to stand up and confess their innermost sins on Sunday mornings to the entire church. You're not allowed to be vaccinated. It was very extreme. And being exposed to that as a young child was really kind of a bizarre thing, but you don't know any different. You just know what you know when you're growing up. But when I moved away from that and, you know, saw the world through a different lens and was not exposed to attending those, church functions twice on Sunday and once on a Wednesday night, and actually kind of saw how the other faiths worked, I really, really pulled hard away from it. Wanted to have nothing to do with it at all, and was angry for a really long time. And right after I moved to Arkansas, a close friend of mine that I'd made here passed away. And one of the things that he had done before he passed away was he and his family had invited me to their church. And so that kind of gave me an exposure to seeing, God and Jesus and Christianity through a different lens than what I had experienced before. And that was attractive to me.
I wonder whether one of the things that I was just thinking in listening to what you were saying, you know, if, growing up in sort of a sect like that where all the adults are confessing, right? On it, you're probably as a kid seeing like the flaws of adults in a way that like most of us aren't until we're much later. But then the other part is like when you're realizing, kind of going through that process of realizing there's something wrong with this church, that you're also probably again seeing the flaws of adults a lot earlier. And I wonder whether there's like a connection between that and journalism, because so much of journalism is about holding people and institutions to account.
Oh, I think exactly. I think when you're exposed to that, I firmly believe from my work in the foster care system what childhood trauma is. And that's a traumatic thing because also a part of the sect is if you have a family member or someone in the church that's not falling in line with the church doctrine, they rejected them, which meant they had to leave the church and leave their family, and you are not to speak to them or have anything to do with them. And that regularly happened in families. And that in and of itself was traumatic. But what that did in my life as an adult, and I still struggle with it, is that if I feel it's really easy for me to get emotional in a situation and want to completely reject somebody. And that comes back to those roots of what I was taught growing up. And so, that was a journey, an emotional journey. But I think that also, as I grew and I started researching, what this religion was, and got more interested in that, I think that that also pushed me on a path of journalism, because it's that desire to want to expose something that you think is wrong or unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I often find that like a lot of young journalists, there's kind of something, right? Like that put them on a mission to learn and grow and look behind corners. And yeah, that idea that you were talking about having that like initial gut reaction to reject things, it must have been like really hard to, because we all have like conflict and confrontations and we have to resolve things with people. Having that as your default response must have been something that took a lot to grow out of. I mean, I know you're a sober living director now, so clearly you've grown out of it because that's
Yes.
nonstop confrontation.
Well, I mean, but yes and no. But I'm estranged from my biological family, from my parents and my sisters, by my choice. And I see a lot of the choices that I've made going back to those early roots of just learning that that's how you dealt with those kind of situations. And so, yeah, I think it's still on an emotional and a personal level, affects me. I don't see it impact me really when it comes to my work, when it comes to outside factors, but I still feel like it's a struggle. And I see it with my husband, because interestingly enough, and I think you will find this kind of crazy, because a lot of people do, is that, when my first marriage fell apart, my first love and I reunited, and he also grew up in that church
Oh,
and
interesting.
that sect. And so he moved to Arkansas, and we ended up getting married. And we've both rejected that faith.
Yeah, but there's something about shared experiences, right? Particularly when we're kids. I mean, you see it with siblings, and you see it with in my 30s, I started dating someone I had known since I was 14, right? Like, there's something about shared experiences that are,
They're
it's not, yeah, they're
it's
powerful.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful.
And I like that you said that, because I feel like he knows and understands me better than anybody else on this planet. And we have conflict. All married people, all partners do, but not like
It's like any good relationship, honestly, because
it's healthy conflict.
yeah,
I mean,
if you don't have conflict, you're really in trouble.
well, and he's married to the sassiest woman on the planet. So, that's conflict in and of itself. But at the end of the day, I know he understands where I'm coming from. And I feel like at the end of the day, I understand where he's coming from as well. So, yeah, that's been an interesting part of my journey, and a journey that I think that I'm going to continue on. I do intend to write some books about that experience, on down the line. Right now, I'm really kind of focused on, this true crime career, so to speak, which has been really good to me so far. I'm very, very pleased and excited.
We look forward to that because I think that one of the things that I've learned over the last year, just kind of like feeling totally unique in my own religious trauma, is hearing the voices of other people who have experienced some religious trauma, as it's something that we don't talk about enough. Like, we don't, it's so core to us, our spirituality, wherever your spirituality lands. And it's such a vulnerable place for both adults and children. And I've sort of convinced myself that there's so much religious trauma, not so much because people in religion are so much worse than the people at work or other places, but that there's so much vulnerability
Right.
in religion that it makes the traumas that more intense because it's
Well,
existential. Yeah.
it is, but what we've done in America, especially, okay, is that we've taken religion and we've weaponized it, okay? We have grown religion to flame the fire of hate and condemnation and judgment and hellfire and brimstone, but that's not really what my faith shows me. That's not what my Bible says. My Bible is that of love and understanding and, acceptance. And so I really, you know, a proponent for people being able to find that healing, especially around that spirituality, because it's exactly what you said. There is a lot of trauma wrapped up into it, but we've got an entire country that's almost blinded by a religion that they've made up. Almost. And I'm a Christian, but I see a lot of Christianity that makes your toenails curl because
Right.
they've bought into hate and condemnation. And that's, I don't know that God.
Yeah, which is
That's
so
not,
different than the words, right?
it is. So, and I grew up with a lot of that condemnation and judgment, and it has deeply affected me and has made me who I am and who I don't want to be. All of those things rolled up in one. And I'm not perfect. Goodness, there's probably a long list of people who would be glad to tell you about my imperfections, but I feel like I try to stay focused and do what I know is right, and try to steer clear of those things that I believe that are hurtful to people. That's really kind of where my heart is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, none of us are going to be perfect at it, but we can all do the best we can with what we have, right?
That's right. That's right.
The one of the things that I was wondering about too was, in that same Democrat Gazette article, I had read about you being a foster mom. And you really do go big or go home. I think the article, am I right, said at the time, and this may have been 2018, I think, 7 foster children, 5 special needs. Is that right?
Yeah, so in our time of fostering, we fostered 13 kids, and of those 13 kids, we adopted 5 of them. And all of those kids have some sort of, whether it be cognitive or some sort of special need. And we never set out to adopt children either. It's just really not what we wanted to do. We didn't think that that was what our path was, but that's just not the way that it worked out. And we love it. I mean, I never imagined that I would have 7 children. That's a lot of kids, let's face it. But it works for us. We don't foster anymore. My youngest is now 7, and my oldest is 27. So I have them in all stages of life. And
Wow.
yes, it's quite a span. But it's been a really interesting and amazing part of our journey, and it's one that I'm so proud of. I really want people to really think about foster care and adoption and see if that's something they would be interested in, because there's so many kids out there that need a loving adult to just provide a home, provide a safe place. And that's really why I got into the work that I'm doing at Oasis, because all of the parents of
That's
the kids.
the sober living place.
Yes, yes, that's the sober living place, because all of the children that we adopted, their parents were addicts
Ah,
and did
yeah.
not have the tools necessary to be able to reunify with their children. And so I'm fighting on the other end of it.
Right. On both, yes, on both ends of the challenge. Why for you was it intentional to foster kids with special needs, or was it just that part of the reason why I asked my mom, and I never got a chance to ask her this question. She died last October, but she
I'm
was a
sorry.
oh yeah. It's been very hard and difficult, but also it's
Mhm.
been like amazing to have the opportunity to carry on the things that she cared about. And one of them, she was a special education teacher and administrator. And, she had an opportunity to work. If you think about where her career was, it was like the, 1960s, 70s, the civil rights movement is moving and integration is moving. She had the opportunity to like do work with regular ed kids and become an administrator. And I never really, I mean, it worked out really well for me because I grew up with a reading, writing, comprehension, learning disability. So having a special education teacher as a mom really helped, which is hilarious that I became a writer, right? Um, and
I love that though.
yeah, right, right. It's the way it works out. Well, and I've always, like, my mom always said, like it was the overcompensation. She said, like, you work so hard to address your reading, writing, comprehension stuff, even before you knew you had it, that you just became a writer and a reader. And but I always wondered like why she decided to pick that path and that passion. So I I'll ask you, since mom's not around to ask, why did you do it?
For me personally, it was children who, you know, were deeply impacted by their parents' drug use, and that created in utero these disabilities that they were then carried on into their life. Severe ADHD, behavioral, cognitive, all the things, and those are the kids that are the hardest to place in foster care. And in my mind, every single child is worthy of a home and an adult to love them and a place to call home. And it was really heartbreaking to me to know that there were so many foster care homes out there opening, Christian foster care homes, mind you, that were putting rules around what kind of kids they would take. There is no such thing as a perfect kid. And when I found out about that, it went back to that personality in mind. I went the exact opposite. I wanted to make sure that the kids that were placed in my home were the kids that nobody else would
Nobody
take.
else wanted. Right, right. You're the person who goes to adopt the blind cat, right? Like the one that nobody else is going to get.
Exactly. And I was just really determined to do that. And so, one of our adoptions was a sibling group of three. And if we had not adopted them, they were going to be split up in the system. And I just could not have that. They'd lost enough. Right.
Yeah.
Um, but that presented its own,
Each other.
that's all they had. But it also presents a lot of unique challenges with bringing in three kids that have had experiences with extreme trauma. So I had to learn a lot about childhood trauma really quickly. And I had to learn how to advocate for my kids really quickly. And
What caused it to even get your attention at first? Like, did you have experiences in life where you were like exposed to the foster care system or drug addiction or something that kind of like pointed you in that direction? Or was it your work with your church?
no, I was at a nonprofit fair one day and I sat up my tent. At the time I worked at a place called Arkansas Support Network. I worked there about 10 years and we provided services to individuals with disabilities and their families. And I was setting up my nonprofit tent and there was a lady that set up hers across from mine, and her name was Handbook. And Anne was telling people about the need for foster care homes in Northwest Arkansas. And I was hooked when she told me. I mean, literally, I was like, I can do this. I can do this. And so we ended up going through all the training. And the first little guy that was placed in our home, he was able to reunify with his family, and we're still in touch with them. So we still get invited to birthday parties and all the things, and that's been amazing. And then the second little girl that they brought into my home was a 17-month-old that they had taken out of a amphetamine infested home. We helped detox this child from methamphetamines, and I fell in love with her. And she stayed with us for about a week, and then a temporary judge sent her home. And that's when I learned about how hard foster care is. And when they sent her home, I laid on the floor it's so painful to talk about, and I cried on my bathroom floor. And because I knew that it was wrong to send her back because nothing had changed. But I had dressed her in this little yellow dress and packed her some food, and they took her back to her house. So at that time, I had a corporate job, and the next day, I guess it was 2 days later, I was giving a presentation, and I never had my phone with me during a presentation, but this day I did. I can never explain to you why I did. But during that presentation, my phone rang and it was the caseworker. And she said, Miss Humphrey, I'm on my way back with this little girl. It did not work out at home. Can you take her back? And I said, I'm at my office. Please bring her now. And
Mm.
called my husband, and told him, and he raced to my office, and the caseworker got there. And when they brought her back to us, she was in the same yellow dress covered in dog urine.
Ugh.
And I promised her that day, I said, whatever happens, you're always going to be safe with me, and I'm going to fight to protect you. And that wasn't, I'm going to fight to keep you away from your bio family. I'm going to fight to protect you. And
Whatever that might be. Yeah.
and 2 years later, a judge determined that she could not return safely to her home. They terminated rights, and we adopted her.
Oh, what's her name?
Her name now is Audrey. We did change her name. Her name is Audrey. She's a beautiful redhead. She is 10 years old.
Aw.
She loves gymnastics and horses, and she's the sweetest little thing ever. And the one other little thing that I'll tell you about this is that shortly after we had brought in the sibling group, so we had Audrey and then the sibling group of 3, the Department of Human Services asked us to take a 2-day-old baby for 3 weeks. Can you take this baby for a couple of weeks? We said yes. When she hit 5 months old, we were calling them saying, hey, we still have this baby. What's going on? And anyway, long story short,
they were like, who's this? I lost my phone.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We continued to keep showing up big for her and for her family, and they couldn't reunify. They terminated rights, and we adopted her. And not long after her adoption, we had a health issue with one of my kids, took him to see a genetic specialist. And long story short, my 2 youngest are first cousins, and nobody knew it.
Oh, way. Wow.
And the chances of that happening is like lightning striking, like 7 times.
Yeah, first cousins. Yeah, that's wild.
So
I just listening to what you're saying, I cannot imagine the emotional toll of the back and forth and the uncertainty. Like, it would be one thing if we were talking about like a job offer or something else like that, but with the little children that you've bonded to, that you're trying to protect and keep safe, and that the law it doesn't always have all the tools for the uniqueness of certain risks, if that makes sense.
it doesn't. It's hard. I remember sitting in that last hearing where the judge had to determine who was going to get to adopt Audrey. And I guess I sat there and I was wringing my hands, and I didn't know it, but other people in the courtroom noticed it. And then the judge, we went through the whole day, the whole hearing, and then the judge determined that it was best for her to stay with us. And I wept. I don't think I've ever wept like that before. The love I felt for that child and the fear I felt of losing her and not knowing she was okay, I think really impressed upon the judge that she was our daughter. Like it was sincere. And that part of foster care is hard because, the ultimate goal is reunification, not adoption.
Right.
And there have been kids that have stayed in our home.
Designed. Yeah.
That's right. And there are many kids that we helped reunify. But it is hard because, you spend a year of a child's life. That's nothing. That's not nothing. That's something. That's a big deal. And it was hard. So we obviously we feel like our home is full. 7 is a big number. And, it takes a lot out of us.
It's my favorite number.
It's the perfect number, but there's no more, and we're just not going to foster anymore. We feel like we did our part. And so now we encourage and try to equip others to do the same.
You're like the model of my favorite Bible verse, which is Isaiah 6:8. It's like, and I also heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who shall go for us? And then he said, here I am, send me. You're like that person. Like you're
Aww.
like,
I want
you
to
are
be
that person.
I want to be. I want to go where God calls me. And, that mission field was tough. It was the toughest thing we've ever done. And I'm telling you, it's not all sweetness and light now that the adoptions are final. You're dealing with years of trauma, and, we have 20 hours of therapy a week that they have to go to for PT, speech, OT, mental health, all the things. And so it's a lifelong commitment that I think people don't understand. It's serious, intense.
Yeah. Yeah. A heavy burden for them to carry, a heavy burden for you to carry with them. And all those other pieces of it. So I guess the natural question I'm wondering is, how do you find time for the rest of it?
Everybody asks me this, and I don't know. I can't tell you other than I've always people have always joked that I have this unnatural amount of energy, and I do.
Mm.
I don't know how I make it work, but I do. And it's, I don't know that I'll always be able to keep up this pace. I mean, I turned 50 in August and I definitely have seen a decline in my energy level, but I am a highly intense, energetic, get it done kind of a gal. And, that's just, that's how I am. And so that's the best answer I can give you. Cause honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea.
It is kind of amazing. It is
Well,
kind
I
of amazing.
appreciate you saying that, but like I said, the energy level's starting to decline. You hit 50 and it just stuff doesn't work the same anymore and you're tired and you forget. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Oh, I completely get that as well. The it started for me at 35 though, I think. Yeah.
35 was my prime. It was absolutely like ridiculous. And I'm going to try to keep this pace up until I'm about 60. I'm going to see if I can do it just because now I want to see if I can, right? It's 10 years. I've got to, but no, seriously. And I'm learning to also take some time for myself, and cut back on, here's an example. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but I'm just going to tell you because we're friends. But, this year I wanted to release 4 books, not 2. And my publisher said, I mean, we'll do it if that's what you want to do. But LaDonna, you have to rest. And I thought about it
You're
and I
like,
was like,
huh?
yeah, I probably should. So we're just going to do 2 and then I'll do 2 next year. But, it's just like you hit that stride and you want to do all the things and life is short. So,
That's actually a really good segue. So I was going to ask you, so taking you back to December 1st, 1994, when Melissa Witt, who was like a 19-year-old student, and I think, correct me if I get any of this wrong, but she was in a small town in Arkansas, Fort Smith, and, she was supposed to be headed off to the local bowling world. And, you know, everything was sort of, I think it was, as I recall, it was in the evening. And then she disappeared. And then I think a couple months later, and I think it was January of the next year, she
yep.
was found nude in Ozark National Forest. I'm not sure, was it hunters or animal trappers? Because I've read it both ways. Sort of stumbled upon her.
It was both. I mean, they were both. They were a hunter and an animal trapper for sure.
Yeah. And how did you become, well, what were you doing on December 1, 1994 or in 1995? And how did you become interested in her case?
I had lived in Greenwood that first year I moved to Arkansas, and that was just outside of Fort Smith, 20, 30 minutes. And so a lot of the friends that Melissa Witt ended up growing up with were friends that I had met too. And so I moved to Northwest Arkansas, and I remember watching it on the news, finding out Melissa was missing. I never knew her, but watching it because nothing like that had ever happened in our state. You've got this beautiful young college student who just disappears. And then when her body was found, I remember driving to Fort Smith for work. There was some sort of meeting, something going on, and I was really, really into the O.J. Simpson stuff. Was listening, it was like
Yeah.
true crime on display for one of the first, crazy cases. And I remember
I'll never
that.
forget sitting in my living room watching that Bronco with my mom and dad and my dad.
Yes, yeah, watching it. That that was
What
crazy.
is
And
happening?
I was, a true crime addict even then. Really. So I was, really taken by that case. But during this, radio station's coverage of the OJ Simpson stuff, they cut in to say that a body had been found in the Ozark National Forest, and they believed that that could be the body of Melissa Witt. And I remember watching storm clouds roll in Fort Smith. And by the
Mm.
time I got to the place where I was, it was pouring down rain. It was coming in sideways. It was awful. And I remember talking about what a terrible day it was, only to find out 20 years later that the detectives also were going through the same thing, because that same rain was coming down in the Ozark National Forest when they were trying to do crime scene stuff because they'd found her body. And so, it was years before I'd get involved in the case. And I never dreamed that this would be something that I would be advocating for, just to be honest
Was
with you.
something about it like stuck in your head?
Well, I had been a part of a nonprofit. I had founded an agency called Let's Bring Them Home, and we offered support services, and we acted as a liaison with law enforcement to families that had missing adults. And we did that work for a very long time until the NAMUS agency came along, and that's a government database. So they're
For
federally
missing
funded.
people, right?
Yeah, missing and unidentified. And so we were closing down our nonprofit, wanted to finish strong, and decided we were going to do a documentary. I thought it was going to be on the plight of missing adults. But I go to this meeting, and everybody at the meeting says, "What about the Melissa Witt case?" And I said, "No, we're not doing that case, guys. They found her body. We're going to do a documentary about missing adults. That's what we're doing." And they outvoted me. And I was so mad. They sent me packing to Fort Smith. They wanted me to go talk to investigators, and I was huffing and puffing, and like, this is not what I signed up to do, and was against it until I got there, walked in that room, and met those investigators. And they had this room full of retired and current detectives who were passionate about the case and who were desperate to get her story out. And I was I was on board.
how
Shortly after.
how how far apart were you and Melissa in terms of age?
2 years. So I
Oh
was
wow.
21 when she was killed, and she was 19. So we were very close in age, but we never met, but had a lot of the same friends, which I think is pretty interesting.
I was going to ask about, what happened to her, but then it just sort of hit me that maybe the question that I really want to ask is, what was she like before she disappeared?
Very popular, sweet girl, very religious, lived with her mom, single mom. They were each other's world. Literally, I mean, I'm not going to give you the whole, she lit up a room every time she was in it, the stuff that you always hear, but she was a real part of her community and her church. She was loved by her family, and she was just happy. She had a great job. She was doing great in school. She had hopes and dreams, and she was a typical teenager. Was not living any kind of risky lifestyle at all. I mean, the most she'd ever done was kissed a boy. I mean, she was living
Mm.
like this all American girl lifestyle. And to have this type of horrific thing happen to her, she was kidnapped. We believe she was sexually assaulted. She was strangled.
Where
And
was where was she? Where was she kidnapped from?
the Bowling World parking lot, she never made it inside to see her mom.
So she was going to meet her mom at the moment. Were there any witnesses to?
There were a couple of witnesses that one was a little boy that wasn't very close to the situation, but could just see the struggle. And then the other person just overheard it. It was a dark parking lot. It was league night. Almost everybody was inside. Pretty convinced the person who she had this altercation with was somebody she knew.
Mm.
They struck her in the head. We know that from the autopsy report. She had a non fatal blow to her head, but it would have bled a lot. Um, we believe he panicked, put her in the car. He drove her an hour away to the Ozark National Forest. And because she was nude when they found her, law enforcement believed that she was sexually assaulted and then strangled. So, shortly after I began this journey to interview detectives, they took me out to that remote mountaintop where her body was found, and that changed my life.
Oh,
And,
that's a,
I'd never been at any kind of crime scene before, never even had been anywhere where they said, "Oh, that's where so and so's body was found." So when I'm there, we get there, it's out in the middle of nowhere, okay, which is a little scary. The first thing that one of the retired detectives says to me is, if you scream right now, LaDonna, nobody could hear you. And I remember thinking how frightened she must have been under the cover of night to be taken to this place in the Ozark National Forest where she had to have known she was surely going to die.
They think she died there.
They know she died there. The debris and leaves that were found in her lungs were inhaled as she was being strangled face down, and it matched up with the soil samples from the Ozark National Forest. So they know it was there. And so just being there, knowing that somebody left her out there, like she didn't matter to anybody, and being a mom to 5 girls, I was pretty choked up about it. I promised her that day that I would not stop until I had brought her case to the forefront and that I had found her killer, and that I wouldn't stop.
Is
And
her
I'm
mom still around?
No, Marianne was her mother's name, and Marianne passed away. I believe it was in 2011, and wanted justice for her daughter, but never got to see that happen. And so, as a mom, I would want somebody to do it for one of my girls. And so I think about her mom as much as I think about her. And so that's really what brought me to this. It started off as a documentary, and then it's turned into my life's work.
You're kind of carrying it one mom to another. Like,
Yeah, for
she's
sure.
gone and now you. Yeah. What's that? There's that saying about, your first death is when you die, the second death is when you're forgotten. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, just keeping it alive. So you eventually you end up exploring the case there, and you mentioned it became your life's work. Tell me more about where it went from there.
So from there, it was just this journey to complete this documentary. But in the course of the documentary, I was doing things that had not been done in cold cases really very well yet. And one was harnessing the power of social media. And when I started this Facebook page called Who Killed Missy Witt, thousands of people started following it. And I was bringing in new tips to law enforcement, like stuff they'd never had before. And that was exciting. This became a tool for them. And then
When is this happening? Around?
it started in 2015.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like, about the time, a couple of years later is when, well, about the same time as when True Crime Garage starts, right? Some of the
Right.
big time things were happening. Michelle McNamara was doing her work.
A
And
few
I'm over
years
here.
before Serial, right?
Yeah, I'm over here doing my own stuff. And, you know, start bringing in new tips. And then I get a phone call one night from a man who I'm not allowed to say his name, but it turns out he's one of the suspects in the case. And I call the detective. I'm like, who is this guy? And they said, oh, you're going to have to come in and talk to us. And suddenly they're onto something. They're working with a civilian who can talk to a suspect who'd lawyered up and won't talk to them, but he's talking to me. And that's when they let me see the case file. And then I ended up getting my PI license and became a member of their team. And I'd like to believe a valuable member of their team.
How many kids did you have at this time?
Um, um, didn't have all 7 at the time. I didn't have all of them until I guess closer to 2017. So I was growing my family at the same time as I was growing this obsession to solve the Witt case.
Yes. Yeah. So you ended up essentially, to some extent, really being close to the investigators, close to you had suspects. I presume the suspect knew he was a suspect if he had lawyered up. You had suspects reaching out to you. You had friends or other people who had clues. You had sort of become at the center of the case in a way of the investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it was just by happenstance that I had all of these things happen. And then it just continued to grow. And about that time is when I met Nick Edwards with True Crime Garage. And he had posted something about the Witt case. And when I went on their show, I was on their show for 2 episodes. It blew the Witt case up. I mean, within days, I had thousands of more people on the page, people contacting me. And that was amazing. We continued really trying to finish the doc and do our investigative work, and then COVID hit, and that
Yeah.
really slowed us down. And so, what I decided to do because of COVID and we couldn't do filming, I said, well, I'll just write a book. And that's what I did.
So that's how the book came. And that's the first one, The Girl I Never Knew. Why'd
Yes.
you pick that as your title?
I get people are so intrigued by that. Because the story that I wrote was as much about my journey into this as it was about her cold case. And I wanted people to be able to understand that I was doing this work for a girl I had never known. I think there's something powerful and intriguing in that. And so I was pretty set on that being the name of the book. And it's actually worked out pretty well. I mean,
So it
people see
had
the
sort
book
of
here.
like two meanings, really, like the girl that you never knew, whose cases you were pursuing, and then the person, the you were learning about as
Yes, you get it. You're the first person that's ever really been able to verbalize that. But yeah, it was exactly that. Melissa Witt, the girl I never knew, but then this investigator, this girl, this person that was, growing
inside
inside of
you.
me. Yeah, I had never known. So you win a gold star for getting it. Thank you very much.
It wasn't that hard to get, so
I love it. I love that you got it. But yeah.
it's a great title. Great title. The I know that so this is it really so True Crime Garage, which is the great podcast, I think. That really sort of like drums up even more interest in the case, and then eventually during the pandemic is the point where you decide, okay, I'm going to focus on the documentary. And I'm guessing by this point Melissa's mom, Marianne's, already passed away, or is she still alive at that point?
No, she passed away in 2011.
Okay, so a while back. I was going to ask you, what after her mom is gone, what keeps you going?
Um, because I'm not a quitter. That's my personality, but because this beautiful girl was stolen away from this world and she deserves justice. And feel like there has to be someone that can advocate for her. And it just so happens that that person turned out to be me. And I just cannot stop until she gets justice. And I won't stop.
Yeah.
I won't.
I once had a homicide detective say a guy in Baltimore who said that like it's hard to really understand what it's like for your job to be to avenge the dead.
Yeah.
And he described it, and I'm going to butcher his words, but he said it almost felt like a sacred calling. That And I remember when I was in New York talking to a cold case detective who was like working a case, I don't know, from like 50, 60 years ago. There was like nobody left. Nobody left. And I remember asking him, like, what are you doing this for? And he's like, I'm the last one, right? I'm the last
Yeah.
one who knows the story. I'm the last one who can. And there's just something really powerful about that to me.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm in a unique position because I've communicated with every suspect in this case. Some of them are now deceased. I've had the pleasure of talking with, meeting with, getting to know pretty much every detective that's ever worked Melissa's case. I'm just in this really unique position, and I've often feel that way because I am going to be one of the last ones before it's all said and done. And I I feel like I owe that to Melissa. And when I started this journey, there was nothing about her on the internet at all. And so my goal was just to get the story out there, and so I feel like I feel like I've done that too.
I imagine in this process, like most investigative processes that take time, there have been ups and downs. What have the ups and downs been for you? What are the ones that stand out for you?
The ups are always, the steps that are getting us closer to justice when the pieces start to come together. The information comes in. That's always, you know, the ups. The downs for me have been the absolute judgment I've received. It's not all embraced well. There are people who say, "Oh, she's in it for herself. She's built this platform so she can, propel herself up." And that's not true. Did it bring me some exposure on a national level because of her case? It did, but it was because of the hard work that I had done to bring exposure to the case. I understand that I'm the mouthpiece for that, but it's not ever about me. It's about Melissa. And so that's been really hard for me. I really struggle with it because it's a hurtful thing, but there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really interesting because it's, like in our world of social media, it's so easy to, you'll love this story, by the way. So, the way that I actually got my first newspaper gig at my student newspaper in high school was, and this is long before, well, not long before the internet, but the internet certainly was not in my high school. I was that kid who would write letters to the editor, right? Like constantly critiquing and criticizing them. And then one day I'm in the cafeteria and I'm in line and somebody says my name and this woman in red hair spins around with her tray and is like, Jason, you're Jason Blair? And she basically gave me the, if you have so much to say, why don't you join us? And that's what really, Ann Sharp was her name, and God bless her. But that it's so coming from the guy who used to write those letters, it was a lot harder to sit and criticize people at that time. And now it's become so easy. And I think it's really easy for people to say, well, let's just brush it off. These people don't know what they're talking about. But as somebody personally who's in the public eye, who gets attacked from time to time, it can be really hard to let go of those things, especially when you're working hard to do something good.
Exactly. It is. But I have to understand, one of my friends, and I won't say who he is, but he's a pretty well-known author. And I texted him one day and I said, I just received the most horrible review on my book, calling me everything that I'm not. And basically saying I'm doing this for some sort of notoriety.
And did he
And he
say,
said,
why do you read your reviews?
well, he did say that, but he said, do you think they've ever written a book, LaDonna? And I said, well, probably not. He goes, then why do you care?
Right.
I was
Right.
like, oh, well, that put it in a new perspective. And, the same has been for the documentary. We've reached a really amazing level of success with the doc, and there's a lot of naysayers. But I've really actually been able to stand strong through it because I know our hearts were in the right place. And it's
Mm.
all for Melissa. And that's all that matters. The people that I choose to allow in my circle are positive. They can keep me in check. I do the same for them. They're the ones that I care about, what they think. And that's the way I have to live my life. Otherwise, I would always be scrambling and upset about what people think.
Well, if you ever need a positive friend who can be guaranteed to also tell you the truth, I'm always available.
Well,
Um,
we are now friends. After this conversation, we are friends for life. I'm really enjoying getting to know you in this way. But yeah,
and actually, our mutual friend Robert says that he reaches out to me when he's tired of getting the feedback he wants to hear. And he needs the feedback that he needs to hear. So
I love that. And I want that in my life. And so those are the people, the ones that I respect and value their opinion. And I'm not saying that I disrespect other people, but these keyboard warriors don't deserve my attention.
right. The documentary, I know it won several awards. And I know it's an investigative documentary, truly. Is it for you, the book and the documentary, it's all about building more awareness for the cases or the case itself? Because I say this because I know that you also run a nonprofit on top of your many other things that focuses on sort of like a narrow area, which is female strangulation cases. Well, it's not really narrow. That's not that. It sounds more narrow than you would think because it happens.
It's just a unique niche. You work a strangulation case for almost 10 years and you start to become an expert in things. And that was a natural progression for us to take on those cases. But for me, the doc was what started all of this. Now we're going to do subsequent docs. I've got 3 under contract right now, which I'm excited about those. We will continue to do those to bring awareness to the cases. And one of the things that I really want to prove is that one, you can do a really well done documentary and get it on a major streaming platform and you don't have to have a gazillion dollars. And that way you can tell more stories because it's not going to just be the high profile cases. It can be all kinds of cases. That's really kind of where I'm going with this because there are so many cases that need to be, brought to the public's attention. So that's really kind of what our goal is.
Hmm. Okay, so that I mean that makes sense. So it's still very much your focus is very much Melissa's case, but even more broadly, is there something unique about these kinds of cases themselves, strangulation cases? Like, 'cause I know you've done work to get certain things tested or certain investigative techniques used. Is that part the idea of maybe like pooling some of that knowledge and
Yeah, pulling the knowledge and then, putting together these types of things that we put out there so we can raise money to pay for those things in cold cases. That's really, really what our goal is just to kind of build awareness and build the funding stream to assist law enforcement who can't always, you know, find the funding. Smaller agencies don't have that kind of funding that's required because there's a lot of money involved in, DNA testing. People will say, "Oh, well, you should just send it over to this place, this genealogy place, this place over here." Well, it's 30,
they've never seen the
60,000.
invoice, right?
That's right. You get a $60,000 invoice and you're going to think, "Well, how am I going to pay for this?" And so there's some motivation in that. And, we're taking it from a really unique perspective. And I'm giving you a little bit of an insight that I'm not shared with anybody else. But the projects that we're doing moving forward, well, most of them, there's going to be a project that's for a male missing person. So that's kind of separate. But everything else that's female related is all going to be grounded in the Witt case. So either we found it in the Witt case file or there was, we're building this story that's going to continue to grow. And so this last book that I'm publishing in April, that's the 3rd in the Witt series, that epilogue will give birth to the next project, the next case.
Nice. It's kind of interesting too, because I've heard this over and over again that sometimes when a case gets a lot of attention, you may not immediately solve that case, but you may end up solving a bunch of other cases because you identify
Yes.
suspects that may be connected to them. One of the things I was wondering about when I was looking into the case and preparing for this conversation, I was going through a bunch of old, obviously Democrat Gazette, the Madison County Record and Huntsville, places like that. And I was looking in the immediate aftermath, like 94, 95, even 96, I saw a lot of coverage, but then I was surprised at how it just kind of disappeared, just given the way things work today. But what do you think about? Was it something about her family that it was in Arkansas? What was it that led this to not capture the public imagination, or does this just happen so often that we're desensitized to it? What do you think?
No, I think, I know exactly what happened. 6 months after Melissa's body was found, we had the biggest child kidnapping case happen in the state of Arkansas and in the nation. And that was 6-year-old Morgan Nick was taken from a ballpark and
Yep.
all attention, and rightfully so, was diverted to finding this 6-year-old girl. And then, that really really kind of grew as word spread, and then the mom started a foundation and got involved with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. and all those resources were turned there. And really what happens, it's like this weird phenomenon that happens. It's that as a society as a whole, the United States gets really hyper focused on children's cases, specifically Caucasian children or Caucasian women. Um,
Indeed.
and it's really troublesome. And so what happened is that really pushed Melissa's case to the side. And I don't begrudge anything that happened because they were still trying to desperately find Morgan Nick. But that's what happened. And then the mom was able to Colleen kept the momentum going. And, there was just nobody to do that, or no, they didn't know how to do it for 19-year-old Melissa, whose body had been found.
Colleen is
Um,
Morgan Nick's mom, or
yeah, yes, yeah, that's her mom. So yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And that happens every day in America. I mean, there's
I wonder
many
what
more.
that must have felt like. Did you ever get a chance to ask Marianne what that felt like, that moment, that
I
time?
didn't get to know Marianne either. I mean, she passed away before 4 years before
Oh,
I
4 years
started
before
this.
you
So
started looking into
I think that,
it.
there's been times that I've asked the, original lead detective, who's now a really good friend of mine, would Marianne approve of what I'm doing? And he always, without hesitating, says, absolutely, she'd be the first to shake your hand.
Mm.
And so that keeps me going too, because Melissa's case needed this for sure.
The do you think you'll get final resolution?
Yeah, I do. We're close. We are very, very close.
Mm. So that's not it's not purely hunch. Something inside you says hunch that you'll get it, but it's even more than that.
Oh, it's more than that. We're coming for him, and he knows it. And I'm hoping that this last book helps push it over the edge, because this next book is written all about the man that I think murdered Melissa. Oh, obviously, I don't name him, but I'm really hopeful that will help continue to push him to make mistakes, because we are confident that we know who killed her.
You know, it's
And
it's interesting there because I'm in one of my interests is a case out in Idaho and Washington where we all very clearly know who the suspect is, and it's many people who were killed. There's like a 0.05% chance we're wrong, because like when bodies are showing up beside you everywhere, it's a little odd unless you're running a drug cartel. But 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 it's really weird. I was talking to somebody else's interest. It's really weird to be virtually certain you know who a killer is, and that they're walking free from charges of the crime. Like, I find myself sometimes like thinking, what is he having for breakfast this morning? Or I wonder what he's doing today. And like feeling like, I don't know, that there's just something wrong with it.
yeah,
Um, whether they're in prison or not, in my particular case, they're not in prison, but it just feels there's just something very strange about it. Like that.
there is. I mean, in this particular case, I worked 7 years undercover pretending to be his friend.
Mm.
And he's just a really bad person. Like, he just is. And it really is frightening to think that he could be out there hurting more girls. But, interestingly, he tries to get a new relationship, he strikes one up, and then somebody out there in the world sends a
Can't
package to the
imagine
girl
who.
and lets him know all the bad things that he's done, that they can port to court records and say these are the things he's done, and so he can't keep a relationship.
I have seen similar things happen.
So, I mean, you know, gotta keep those girls safe. And so,
Well, and that's actually really super. That's actually really a great point, because even though law enforcement can't put the handcuffs on whoever you strongly believe did it, there are things people can do to try and warn people or keep people a little safer.
absolutely there are. And he knows that I suspect him. That's where we're at in our quote unquote relationship, whatever you want to call it, between
Do you
us. And
guys
so,
still talk?
no, no, not anymore.
Yeah.
I
What?
can't continue that. Police asked me to nix it because we're getting so close that we don't want to muddy the waters anymore with any kind of contact me having with
Yeah.
him. So, yeah, I've cut him off, and he's a scary man, and so I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to oblige, but I got a lot of great information, a lot of intel, and when he reads this book, he's going to be screaming.
Yeah.
So, because I'm going to out him. And the thing is like, what's he going to do about it? Because if you want to sue me and say I've written a book about you, you're going to admit that you're the suspect.
Well, and there's the other part, right? Like that the ultimate defense to defamation is truth. I was talking to a friend about this. It's like, aren't you afraid of naming this guy? I'm like, no, it would be great if he sued me. Discovery would be so much fun.
Yeah, right,
Right.
right. I mean,
Please
coming
sue me.
I have been sued for defamation and slander, and I lost that suit. I mean, I lost it
What
uh,
happened with that? That was.
unjust. It was an old employer. It's We're still litigating, but I was accused of because you can accuse anybody of anything in
Mhm.
litigation, and that's what happened to me. And I am still fighting to overturn that. But discovery is a really sticky thing, and should he choose to sue me, we will get him in discovery.
Yeah, it would be fascinating because, the ultimate defense to defamation, right?
Yes, it's
It
truth.
is truth. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why does truth matter to you though? Why does the truth matter when you get to the point where there is, no mom left around? I don't know that she didn't have siblings, does she? Or does she?
She had half siblings who are much
Half
older than her.
siblings.
They're probably in their
Didn't grow up
70s
with her.
now.
Okay.
Um, it matters because she mattered. It matters because she made a mark on this world and people cared about her and she was loved and she deserves that.
She's kind of
And
like those little kids that you brought in, like who matter in the world and who deserve
yeah,
like a home. She deserves life.
she didn't deserve that. And, to me, that ultimate justice will be, him getting the handcuffs slapped on him. And I've had lots of dreams about Melissa over the years, but one of them, and I write about this extensively in my last book, is I'm a 90-year-old woman and I'm standing at the gates of heaven, and I'm looking over this golden shore in my dream, and it's beautiful, and I could see this girl coming over to me, okay, and she's excited. You could tell she's really excited to see me. And in this dream, I know that she wants to meet me for the first time. I don't know how I know that, but you know how dreams are. And when she gets to me and she touches my hand, it's like all of these unspoken words, right? In this one moment. And then she says, "Hi, I'm Melissa." And in that
Hmm.
moment in my dream, she's no longer a case to be solved. She's no longer a tragedy. She's that real human person who had this beautiful life that she only got to live for 19 years. And in that dream, it brought me so much closure, right? And it seems silly saying that about a dream, and then you wake up and it's like you can still hear her voice. And I think that's what like propels me forward is the fact that she was more than just a case file. She was more than just this tragic story. She was a girl who had a voice and had a purpose in this world, and she was robbed of those things. And to me, that's so unjust that someone has to stand up and say, no, this is not okay.
That's powerful. Let me give you a chance to. I want to give you a chance to just share any sort of like closing thoughts. I mean, I've I've been moved by your pursuit of the case. I've been moved by you as a mom. I've been moved as you by you as a survivor of religious trauma, and just listening to our conversation, I'm beginning to see how all these things are kind of connected, right? Like the investigator or investigative journalist that grew up in you, the person who wanted to do better in the world, that became a foster mom, and all of those things going into this case. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts you wanted to leave people with, or things you want them to think about or consider?
I think the biggest thing that I would want to impart, this, call it wisdom, call it, closing thoughts, is that we are all moved by different things in this world. Okay. Whether it's, whatever that advocacy looks like. It's everything from making sure that healthy meals are being provided into your community, foster kids, or, taking care of animals, whatever you're moved by that really stirs your soul. That is your calling. And I just encourage people to grab a hold of that with two hands and don't let go, and to fight for what you believe is right. For me, that's justice for Melissa Witt. Does that answer some other unsolved trauma in my life? Maybe it does. One of the things that we didn't discuss, and I'll just briefly talk about, is that as a child, someone tried to abduct me from a bowling alley, and that abduction was thwarted. And is there something psychological there for me because Melissa went missing from a bowling alley? Probably. There probably is, because my story ended so differently. But I share that because we all have those things, those driving factors, those things that happen in our life that lead us toward that advocacy. And don't turn away from that small, still voice, because you just don't know what kind of impact. Maybe it's going to impact one person. That's still huge. And maybe it's going to impact 10 million people. That's huge too. But whatever you do, that is your purpose. And that calling is important to this world because it will change lives. And I hope that, my story can be a testament to that, because I'm determined to save lives in the sense that I'm bringing attention to a cold case in hopes that maybe we can prevent this from happening to other girls, because we're going to educate the community that these things happen, right? That, this kind of intimate partner violence, this can happen from an ex-boyfriend or an ex-love, that there's that education component, but also from the standpoint that even though Melissa is gone, she still mattered, and it's still important to fight for her. And I want to be able to teach others that they can do the same over the things that they're passionate about.
That's so amazing, like thinking about the idea of like what we lost that she could have brought in the world, and then just switching the two of you out and you being the one that was lost, and thinking of people like Audrey, and thinking about, you know, the loss that would have existed if you had been the one that disappeared. Like, in thinking about your title, you almost were the other girl in the girl you
Yeah.
never knew. Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. And that this nonprofit that you talked about, that's born out of this work for Melissa, called All the Lost Girls, that's really where our heart is, because there are so many lost girls. And whether that is they've been lost to murder, they're missing, or they've just lost their voice because of, violent crime, it's really important to us to build that advocacy on behalf of all the lost girls because of Melissa Witt. And in my heart, that's us being able to bring forth the good that she was intended to carry forth in this world. Like, it didn't stop now. Think of all the things that now are happening because of Melissa Witt. And that's what keeps me going. She deserved that. And I'm just not going to stop. And I hope that scares the hell out of the man that killed her.
If you would like to join us for more discussions with us and our listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. This is Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.